All right, we are indeed back. I wanted to just tell a bit of a story. You see, I was walking to a bar one day, right? I walked into the bar, and you know what I see? I see a dog sitting at a stool at the counter, and so I'm looking at this dog, and the dog is doing dog things, licking up spilled beer and trying to eat the peanuts that were supplied by the bartender. And so I'm looking at this dog, and it turns to me, and the dog says, "What are you doing? Why are you staring at me? You know that's rude." And I asked, "Well, why is that rude? Is it not an arbitrary stipulation we are beholden to?" And the dog said, "It's just rude." And I asked, "Why is it rude? Why is it rude?" And the dog said, "Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure why it's rude, but I've always lived in this expectation that it is. I've always been, you know, uh, told off by my parents saying it's rude, it's rude, but I'm not sure why." I asked, "Well, why then? Why should you follow it? Why do you impose that stipulation upon me when you could admit yourself, Mister Dog, that it is an arbitrary rule? It is an arbitrary rule of civilization." And the dog said, "Well, it seems that these exist for a reason. I don't think I'm going to question them, or at least I'm not going to hold them to such a scrutiny because, well, it's part of this culture that we live in, uh, and I wouldn't want to oppose the culture." And you know what I say? I say, well, why not? Why not oppose the culture? If it really is arbitrary, why not oppose it? I mean, is really not staring at somebody due to perceptions of rudeness or just being impolite, is that really such a detriment to civilization? Is that really such a detriment? No. And so the dog said, "Well, I suppose you're right, but I feel that it is very important, at least, for just general participation in a more utilitarian sense." And I said, "Well, I suppose you could be true. However, I think that this argument isn't exactly the best, right? Because you're just kind of arguing from a legalist perspective, not whether you should or should not, but rather in a more means and merit based. It's fine if you want to, but it just seems arbitrary. Why follow it if it's so arbitrary?" And furthermore, what is only good for employment is that uh, you show up on time, you work hard, and that is it. If a boss really cares so much about adhering to such arbitrary social stipulations, then they themselves are a product of an arbitrary society. They are the product of the arbitrary, and they're really not worth anyone's time, right? And so the dog tells me, "You know what? I do see your point. However, I feel we should not sacrifice job opportunity uh, and uphold these views that society is, well, yes, arbitrary, um, that we are to put this at the expense of our employment, that we are not to acquire and attain uh, quality living, quality living." While, you know, the dog said to me, uh, "While I do understand your point, I suppose I take the more utilitarian approach in social rules. And while you do have a point, I don't. I just think that employment is superior." And I said, "You know what, Mister Dog? I think you're right in a sense. I think that yes, you should always play the game when it comes to employment, and you should always adhere to some kind of employment opportunities. However, I would not say you should ever sacrifice, your belief in the arbitrary. as the laws which govern society, and I still don't think you should adhere to them. Because, I mean, think about it this way. Look, when I walked into this bar and I was looking at you, you subconsciously thought, wow, that's rude, rather than thinking, wow, that's such an arbitrary stipulation that we're beholden to in society, and I'm acting as an arbiter of these stipulations. And so, perhaps it's best if we don't, together, you and I, Mr. Dog, or at least anybody who's listening, that we don't adhere to these socially. In employment, we can, but socially, we should not sacrifice or obfuscate our personalities to appease the social consciousness, and that we should act rationally as opposed to being entirely dependent upon these irrational social norms. Now, there are certainly social norms which exist for a reason, I told him, Mr. Dog, such as family. Family is not arbitrary. Family is a vital necessity it's the basic building block of civilization. Heterosexual traditional family units. That is the basic building block of civilization. However, something as silly as don't listen to some may consider indecent music in public when it's in your own headphones or whatnot, or don't read this or that book in public, such as, Revolt Against the Modern World. You can't read that in public. Well, I think that's arbitrary. That's entirely arbitrary. If somebody wants to listen to black metal and read Revolt Against the Modern World in public, should they not have every entitlement to do so? It is their prerogative. It's not as though they're acting as a detriment to society and the family unit, the building block of society. And so Mr. Dog says, I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right that society has become too arbitrary, that society is perhaps inhibiting creativity, and that we must act in our own accord to aid society, and thus aiding in our creativity, which can aid society. It can give us ideas, inventions, and aspirations to achieve something higher than what we are imposed. That we should defend the family unit while also living as we please. And so I said to the dog, that is astute, and that is a good observation. However, I think you've really conflated a lot. I think you've conflated, this servitude to the family unit with servitude to society. That this family unit is an element of society as opposed to the building block of it, and something that is transcendent of the social consciousness, something that is far above it. And to which I say that we are not to live in service to something which comes innately, and that society, and that the state must exist in the defense of the family unit to sustain liberty. And this liberty, this prerogative of liberty, entails that we may do as we please. So if I desire to stare at a stranger in public, they can't really say that I can't, because, well, I can. If they really don't like it that much, well, they can quite frankly move. Or just wait for me to get bored, or ignore me. And so the dog said, you're right, however, I would not say that family is absolutely transcendent. I disagree with your point, but I agree with you that the state ought to have some kind of encouragement of the family unit, because the family unit is a building block of society and morally good. But I would not say it is absolutely transcendent. And I asked, well, why wouldn't it be transcendent, Mr. Dog? And the dog said, I just don't think it's transcendent because it is material. And I said, well, obviously it's material, but does something material can something material not transcend something else that is material? And the dog said, well, I suppose it could. I suppose it could. Such as an employee transcending their employers, or rather the other way around. Sorry. And the dog said, I think you have a point, but I think it's still a part of society, and that it is not transcendent. And so I said, well, I think that that it is a transcendent force, not inherently divine, but certainly metaphysical in a sense, that it connects us to the divine, that the family unit is a divinely ordained structure that is both innate in humans and, well, I suppose in dogs as well, but also that is above us. That transcends us, and that has been ordained by God. And uh, and the dog said, "I suppose I'm not as metaphysical as you, uh, and that you partake in a theology, whereas I do not." And so I said, "Well, I think I'm not really speaking of any particular theology, more so of just the truth. Though I suppose this could be considered a theology if you consider theology to be truthful. Well, I certainly do." And so the dog said, yes, I think it's inherently a theology, but of course I understand your arguments. I understand your argument you're coming from, and that the family unit is inherently the most important building block of civilization. And so I said, I'm glad we could reach some kind of concession. And so me and the dog shared a few more drinks, and we had a great time. We really did. And yeah, and that concludes one of my first encounters with Mr. Dog, my favorite man I had ever met.